Alright guys, today we're going to talk about Midnight Robber by Nalo Hopkinson and why you should pick this up, why it's worth reading if you are a lover of science fiction. She is a Canadian author, also from Trinidad, and is Ninjiri from Onyx Page's favorite author, one of the reasons I picked it up, and my friend Nikita's favorite book by this author. And Nikita has also written a review for this book that I will have down below. I highly recommend checking it out. She is from Guyana, and so she has more insight into all of the cultural influences that you see throughout this book. It was great buddy reading it with her and then having a mini books discussion with her about it, so highly recommend reading that review. Also, there are multiple covers for this book. This is the one I got from the library, and I really like it. It really describes what you're going to get in this book. This book is about Tan, who has this other persona as the Midnight Robber Queen, I'm pretty sure is the name. And she's a young girl who grows up in a high-tech village town on a planet that is colonized primarily by people from the Caribbean. And her parents are the worst, and because of events, she ends up in New Halfway Tree. And when she's there, she has to learn how to survive. It's very different. It's a much more low-tech world, and that's what I'll start with, I guess, the synopsis. You get to follow Tan as her life has changed dramatically, struggle and survive. And on that New Halfway Tree, it is such a cool world and planet to explore. This story is it's so impactful to me in terms of that. I read this 2 months ago, I want to say. Yeah, I read it at the beginning of July. I still am thinking about it. So what did I gain from this book? Well, it was a 4-star read, so just as a reading experience, I am very happy I picked it up. But it was also phenomenal for book club discussion. I had a great buddy read discussion with Nikita, and then also Nikita, Musical Tati, and Aaron and I had this wonderful book discussion together. And I will have Nikita's review down below, Musical Tati and Aaron's booktube channels down below, because they are both booktubers. And just the fact that you could have such an enriched conversation about a work always makes it better, and the fact that there are so many things that you will not get on a first read, so to have multiple perspectives help you parse out what you want, and it's so worth your time. If you can get past, I think, the biggest trigger warning I'll talk about. So the trigger warning for this that I really think everyone needs to know about is that there is graphic child sexual abuse. It's horrible. It's very hard to read, and you hate it so much, and yeah, it's just not great. I mean, it's important for the story, but if that's something that's really hard for you to consume, I don't blame you for skipping this one. Now, if you can get past that, there are so many things to take away from this book. For one, the narrative structure and writing style is so cool. I can't talk about why I love the narrative structure so much because it might be a spoiler, but you have this overarching narrator, and you keep going between kind of these folk tales about Tan and the plot of real Tan's life. So you're going between these two, which is a little jarring, but it's really interesting dissecting how this folklore tale, it parallels to the real life story. So that's really cool. But also, I think a pro but a con for some people is that this is written in dialect. Primarily, I think Nikita was telling me mostly has Trinidad, but also some influences from Guyana and maybe Jamaica. But that can be jarring to read if you're not used to it. For me, I had to just read the first page out loud a little bit, and then once I got that cadence and rhythm and kind of just realized the grammar of the dialect, essentially, I was fine for the rest of the story, personally. I do know that the audiobook is only available for Audible exclusive, but that it's a very well done audiobook. I think only a few words were mispronounced when Nikita and I were talking about it. But if you can read it in dialect, it just feels like someone's telling you a story, because that's what I'm saying. This overarching narrator is telling the story, but in a very interesting way. It felt very I don't know how to describe it. Like when you have that fourth wall break in The Princess Bride, you have the old man telling the kid the story. So it makes it challenging. This is not an easy read, but it's so worth the challenge if you can push through. I thought so, at least. I thought this was well worth reading, a good challenging read. Even though, like I said, it wasn't easy in content, it wasn't easy in narrative structure, but the narrative structure is a thing I really liked about it. I liked the challenge and how it led to discussions. I actually read it on Kindle, and then I got this from the library so I can go back more easily to sections and reread short sections to then put them in the context of the whole. It was, yeah. But I will say it makes the plot sometimes hard to follow, and that it is challenging. This is both a positive and a negative for me. Another huge positive is the world building. Okay, so in New Halfway Tree, I think they're Douans. It's spelled D-O-U-E-Ns, which is based off a Caribbean folklore tale, but they're different in this story. And you have, I think that's Chichiba and Benta, and they are these creatures that live in these like hive trees, and the world is so vibrantly described that even me as a non-visual reader was so there. I knew exactly what was happening. I really loved how everything looked, because it's not a great place. Like, so you have these gritty villages, you have the colorful but dangerous jungle area. It's such a cool world. We were even discussing like the world you have before New Halfway Tree is this AI world. Essentially, Granny Nanny takes care of everything, and there's kind of this tension between people who are plugged in and people who want to be not plugged in. That could have been its whole story. I want to read so many things in this world, and I'm so sad there's not. This is a complete story. But the world building was so good that I wanted so much more, because I was given a really good comprehension of the world, so I really wanted to explore different storylines. Like, you have in New Halfway Tree these different villages that have different cultures and rules. I wanted to visit more of these villages. I wanted to see how each village worked, how they handled the chaos, because it's very much like Wild West. There is no law, there's just whoever's like stronger sort of thing. It's just, there's so many things in this world that I'm interested in because of how well the world building was done, and I was always interested in all the things I was seeing in this book. Another thing that I think's done really well is the character work. So Tantan is our main character. Tantan, you feel for Tantan. But even though you feel for Tantan, and you know Tantan's had a hard life, and a lot of Tantan's situation is not her fault, she's still so flawed, because you get a section of her, I think half the book she's a teenager, and boy, does she make some teenage decisions. Not like, oh, you're so dumb. Like, they're relatable teenage decisions. But I like that we have this character that we want to empathize with, that, you know, we care for, that, I mean, I just wanted to give Tantan a hug, give her a safe place. And, you know, she's also kind of a dumb teenager, being a little too reckless. You know, you get mad at her, you get disappointed. I felt very, like, invested in Tantan. On the flip side, one of my least favorite characters of all time is in this book, but I couldn't have disliked him so much if he wasn't so well built. You know, like, he's the first character you see. And man, is he a piece of work, and I hate him so much. But on the flip side, some of my favorite male characters are in this book. Chichiba is so sweet. I love him so much. I love Melonhead. Like, there are characters I love, characters I hate. I had strong emotions about almost every character that I came across in this book, and I just thought that was great. So, yeah, that's the character work. And then, what are the themes? Like, what are some themes I took away from this work? There are probably more than this, but the ones that I came up with include, how do you adjust to a cruel reality? I don't know if that's so much a theme, but it's like trying to answer that question, you know? You're taken away from everything you know, you have to adapt. I mean, we all go through change, we all have to adapt, some in crueler situations than others. I mean, how do you adapt if you are going through a divorce, right? How do you adapt when you are forced to move because your parents make you? How do you adapt to change that's just completely out of your hands, you know, and how hard that change is varies person to person. I thought that was explored really well through Tantan, who is a child who never gets to be a child, who really has to survive. And I also think it explores, how do you fit into a new culture? Tantan has to do this many times throughout the story, with more grace in some situations than others. And I think that's important, how it gets kind of tackled in this story. There's no right or wrong. Well, there are wrong ways to adjust to a new culture, but like it's not like there's a guidebook for this, you know? Like being in a new culture is going to be jarring. You're going to make mistakes. How do you adjust to that? You know, it was something you really got to see multiple times throughout this story. And then lastly, one that I thought really came up is how do you handle guilt and consequences, whether it's guilt you actually deserve or not. You know, there are consequences to all actions. How do you handle that? So, you know, previously I'm like, how do you adapt to cruel circumstances? Well, in that one, I'm thinking circumstances outside of your control. This one, how do you adapt to situations that change because of things you have done? I just really liked this story. I don't know if I'm really selling it. It's a hard read. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's hard because of the writing style, because that's not something we're all used to. It's hard because of the narrative structure choice. It's hard if you're not used to a Caribbean setting. Not that this is in the Caribbean, but there are so many references to Caribbean folklore, which is why you should probably check out Nikita's review. I haven't read it yet myself. I'm filming this before it's published, but I know I benefited a lot by having her to talk to because she was more familiar with the content. She's from Guyana, so she's not necessarily from the islands where most of the folklore is taken from, but she's more engrossed in it than I am, and that was really beneficial for me. But also Google's a thing. It's unlike any science fiction I've ever read, and I highly recommend it. You know, in a time where people are always like pretending like they can't find diverse authors in the genres they love, science fiction has a plethora of diverse authors. You just need to find their work and be willing to put in the effort to appreciate it, right? I just think if you do read this, you should do a discussion with a bunch of people, and you're more than willing to discuss it with me in the comments below. What is also, if you want in the comments below, a book you've picked up recently that you feel is a very underappreciated, underhyped, diverse sci-fi read. And if you just want to leave me emoji, I don't know. Leave me one of a hat, because I really like the Midnight Robber hat. Bonus points if it looks like that hat. I don't know what emojis are. But like if you like it, subscribe if you want to, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.